Next thing we'll go into here, we're actually going to, these next two sessions are going to essentially run together. We're going to be looking at the cooperative demonstration sites. If you remember yesterday in the introduction, we talked about how this class is normally taught during the growing season over 3 days and incorporates these field trips to demonstration sites. Our plan is to reconvene this summer and visit those demonstration sites and kind of revisit a lot of what we talked about here. But for right now, Pete is going to give us an introduction to the demonstration sites, what's been happening on those sites, and what we've learned so far.
All right, thanks. Unfortunately, you get me to wrap up our whole thing because we got kind of two things right in a row here. We're going to talk about our cooperative demonstration sites. It's going to lead kind of right into the innovation stuff that kind of is going to wrap up our formal presentation. So try to do your best to hang with me on this. The way this is formatted is it's going to actually, one of the things with teaching and learning, we kind of figured it's good to hear things more than once. So the demonstration sites are a place that we were trying to do some demo, some targeted learning, and you're going to hear that they, in large part, I think what you're going to hear is a reiteration of a lot of the tidbits that you've already heard, and so hopefully this will drive some of those truths home, and at least maybe hope to shed a little bit of light on some of the questions that I've been kicking off. Like I kept saying, we're going to do that later, you're going to do that later, and that's really frustrating when you ask a question and the instructors are like, yeah, we're going to talk about that later. You don't get your question right away. But there was some strategy to that because it's a lot easier to answer some of these questions in pictures. I want to also say, Brett mentioned the fertilizing. When he said, I know a lot more about fertilizing, I don't. I just know a lot about what not to do because we did a lot of the, the literature research and some of the practical stuff. And I just want to make sure that everybody understands that what Brett said is 100% on target. Like fertilizing native plants is just a waste of time and money, and all you do is end up stimulating more C3 plants, which are your cool season exotics that do love that nitrogen, and your thistles. So it's just, there's now, so far, we're not aware of any science or experimentation that would ever support that. It's just, it's one of those paradigms that people just have to kind of shift away from. So anyway, a lot of what I'm going to cover in this was covered last year in a series of 2 1-hour webinars I did for NRCS, so I'm condensing this quite a bit. I'm cutting a lot out. I try to not cut so much out that you don't understand the bridges between one thing to the other. But if you really want to take a deeper dive into what I'm going to show, you can log on to the NRCS's website. This will all be on the video that we're creating as well, but there's the tech training, the Thursdays has got the parts 1 and 2 on, and then down lower there's a series on these SDSU research plots as well that's on the YouTube. So, okay, so crop failures and disappointments. We've talked a lot about all of this already. I'm not going to read all this verbatim, but what are the source of our failures? History, methods, crops, chemicals, preparation, quality. And that's the thing, we only ask these questions when we fail. We actually never really know why we succeed either. Like we think we know why we succeed, but there's just as many variables in success as there is failure. And we don't have a good handle on all of those. So I think the things that you can take home from this class is that what we're willing to share on is collective experience, education, time, that, it gets to the point where there's just enough trials that have been run across that they're more or less we're probably hitting the mark on a lot of this. So let's talk about cover crops. This is one thing that's come up. It's the thing that we've kind of been avoiding as far as any detail. We jumped on the cover crop bandwagon as a group a few years ago, and we wanted to ask those questions about cover cropping and some of the assumptions. By and large, what our premise was on using cover crops was, could they actually serve as a surrogate? If you got a variety of cover crops that covered the gamut of cool season, warm season, grass, broadleaf, whatever, could we actually have cheap cover crops kind of kickstart the soil biology that we were asking our native plants to do, which are much more expensive, like when we're going into an old field situation? That's kind of was the driver behind the cover crops. So we wanted to kind of coordinate that amongst other objectives, testing USDA guidelines. Can we reduce chemical carryover? Can we improve soil health, et cetera? The hypothesis is that if we used cover crops for 1 to 2 years, that we would, again, serve that as a surrogate for these native plants and maybe get the soil biology talking and working, right? And the fact is, cover crops were sent straight from God. So, come on, man, what a dry crowd. Like, cover crops are the thing, right? Okay, anyway. This group, I just can't say enough about this group. You've seen this time and again, but we get together pretty frequently. It's not always everybody all the time. This was one of our bigger team meetings. I think there was a dozen of us there. But you can see everyone that's listed along the side as well that wasn't present in this particular meeting. There's just so many people that we cooperate and coordinate with. We had 5 demonstration sites that I'm going to talk about here across eastern South Dakota. They're all going to involve some level of using cover crops. And the data that you're going to see, the hardest data is going to come from that northeast farm at SDSU. I want to just give credit quick to NRCS for funding the research and trials at the SDSU research farm. That was a direct funding from South Dakota NRCS. So what we did, I'm going to kind of burn through this fairly quickly. I don't want to bore you to death, but they were essentially learning plots. These are non-replicated research. We just didn't have the time, space, funds to do hardcore replicated research. But so that we call them learning plots. Let's just kind of get out there and try some of these things, compare, contrast, see what we can find. We kind of had a 5-year window. It's 2026 now. I think this is going to be the last year that we have that land locked down in these grasslands, and so we'll see where we go with that at the SDSU plots. But now again, I'm just bear with me here because I'm not showing you all of everything. There's just way too much to fit into a day like today. But by and large, we were going into old bean stubble crop field and old wheat stubble crop field. And we had, this whole thing is only about 6 acres, but we have a combination of trials. They're tilled and no-tilled, so the darker are the tilled, the lighter are the no-tilled. These are the wheat area. These were the previous year's crops. And then in that tillage and no-tillage, we used a standard CP37 CRP kind of mix that we planted into those tilled and no-tilled areas, okay? This is the grass species. I'm not going to read all these, but 12 species of forbs, 8 species of grasses, kind of a run-of-the-mill CRP type mix for a CP37 category planting. We manage these sites with Brett went through all this already, so we did a lot of mowing management early on. Again, it's at a research farm too. One of the biggest things that I had to balance here is working for SDSU was that we couldn't have our plot impact the research of the crop research that was going on around it. So we had to be really careful with making sure that we didn't have excess weeds or anything like that early on. And then the southern plots, this is where we drilled in a cover crop, that cover crop mix, which looked like this after it grew up, and this when we burned it off, and then we replanted it the second year with the same mix. So this is our cover crop mix. It's like an 8 species mix or 12 species mix. And then we also mixed, so we re-drilled covers into areas that we had already drilled the CP37 mix prior to as well. So we did we started getting pretty messy with this, just trying a whole bunch of different things as we were, experimenting. After we burned the residue off on the covers, this is the kind of medium that we planted those the native grasses into. And immediately we were seeing thistles coming already, and that's just site history. You'd think at a research farm we could get a handle on what our chemical history was, but nope. It just wasn't recorded very well. I just really don't know what the long-term chemical history was on these plots. Okay, then at the Game Fish and Parks area at Redland, this is out west of Watertown. Very similar. I'm going to burn through this. A series of plots, till and no-till, using grass forb or a grass mix in the fall of 2017. This one was, is that a broadcast? Did we broadcast that one? That was all drilled? Okay. All of these were drilled mixed into tilled and untilled. Nice native prairie mix in that. I don't know, I think we had 50 species or so. I'm not going to look at all of them right now. Or 38, I guess, 38 species. And then monitored throughout, through the early 2018. This was a fall planting, and this, we had growth already in spring of 2018. And then again here, there was a mix of covers and grasses across the site. So I'm just going to highlight that. This is where the southern area that we utilize cover crops. Their cover crop mix, slightly simpler, not too much. I think there's, 10 species in that mix, and I think we had 12 on the SDSU site, so similar. Okay. Those again drilled across the site, and then there was some areas that the cover crop was mixed with the actual grass as well. Overall management there, green, they mowed, burned, and then what we call this open management, where this was kind of prescripted trial management. This over here, they could do whatever they wanted, whatever was needed at the time, just reactive to what the grass stand was telling them that they should do. We've held tours out on all these sites over time, this particular grassland management school. Okay, the third site that I'm going to introduce you to then is the Hart site with waterfowl production area that Kyle manages. And this particular project is a little different, but it's interesting. They were trying to diversify some low diversity grasses with the addition of forbs, and then he worked in a cover crop interim as well on some of these trials. So Kyle planted these cover crop strips here. We hayed them off, treated them with Roundup, glyphosate you see there. Second year glyphosate, and then they went into a cover crop seeding and then followed up with a native mix. And Kyle just used what they called the what is that thing called? The classic trio, a very simple cover crop, mostly the radish turnip type thing in his cover crop trial. And then his seed mix, I don't know, Kyle, what is that, 25 something species? Something like that. His trials, though, were kind of interesting. So here he drilled every strip that was covered, got a native mix. In the center area, there was no use of cover crops, and it was just, and then the native mix was drilled into every one of those glyphosate sprayed strips, right, Kyle? That would have been? Okay, and then the third area, broadcast cover crops, and the native mix into those strips. And what he was trying to do is retain some grass cover while he was trying to just enhance the overall functionality of the site, just kind of a little playground project. This is kind of what it looked like where Kyle was on the ground. Okay. The fourth project you've heard me talk about already, it's the Carolyn Eck project. That one is a little different because that was go back grassland. I've included this map to show that basically our data showed that there was no native remaining on any of these areas. All of these are gravel pits on the site with just a little bit of native here and a little bit of native here. So a very gravelly, not very receptive, old crop ground, go back junk. It's probably one of the worst sites as far as, trying to, like, for farmability, it just isn't a very good site. So going back into habitat is perfect there. We have data from this site. We haven't really talked too deeply on soils data, but Kent and Jay have talked about, dynamic soil properties and what it means. Here we applied it. I mentioned that earlier yesterday. I'm just going to highlight the cover crop. So this is a very disturbed area, right? Historically disturbed. Organic matter lowest at the surface of all of the 4 types of covers that are on the site. The phosphorus is lowest as well. Is Kent in the room? Or Jay? Jay's in. I don't know. It'd be cool when we get into discussion to talk about some of this stuff. So the nitrogen at that spot is also lowest. Lowest nitrogen. Just productivity is terrible on this. And the pH is here, which is slightly more acidic than what I guess you want in cropping. I'm not sure if it's acidic based on the natural variability of the site or not. I don't know that. Electrical conductivity was also lowest. So I'm not a soil scientist, but basically it was lowest in all categories. So probably indicates that it's just not a very good site. That's your potassium. That's a goofy line. Fungi and things like that, we measured that. We don't have a lot of data. I can't really speak to this. I'm just going to show you what it was. So this is our cover crop area. This is our active fungi. This is our total fungi here, the active bacteria, and the total bacteria. Okay, just to show that we do have some background data on some of these things. Cover crop, the protozoa, and nematodes. So all that's measured and recorded. What it means over time, we don't know yet. It's only a few years old. That stuff doesn't change very quickly, so I just wanted to set the stage for that. Anyway, so at the X site, like I talked about yesterday, we sprayed it out because it was just all brome, bluegrass thistle, you know, not a native. The only natives were in there were like prairie coneflower and gumweed, I think. 8-way mix, same mix that we used at SDSU, went into that, and the Conservation District planted that cover crop for us 2 years in a row. So glyphosate and cover crop 2 years in a row on that site. Had pretty good establishment of cover crops in year one. Replanted into that same cover crop area after spraying in year two. And once we did get rain, we had a very, very dry 2021 was just terrible until about way late July. We started getting rain, and those covers, in a lot of areas, they popped where the geese hadn't eaten all the seed anyway. So that gives you some background. The fifth trial then is one we did at home, myself and my neighbors, just a very small one, 2.5 acre. Again, this was an area that was historically was go-back grass, and then in 2015 or so, the neighbor plowed it up and tried to crop it, and it just was worthless. So then they wanted to do something different with it. I said, well, let's put covers in there for a couple years and go back to some kind of grass. It's just a couple acres. I don't have all of the photos in here, but I pre-grade. So I planted this into covers, broadcasted it, and drug it in. Cover crop came out awesome. It was just fantastic, and I grazed it. I think I got with a dozen heifers. I think they were on that 2.5 acres. I'm pretty sure I got 2 weeks worth of grazing out of that 2.5 acres with a dozen heifers. I mean, the productivity was just through the roof. But that was in July, and then come August, now that there was no cover competition, the weeds so this is all pigweed, mare's tail, cockle burr, buffalo burr, all the bad nasties, Canada thistle, musk thistle. I mean, everything just came, and there was really no competition. So we didn't even have a mower, so I went out there with a lawnmower, and yeah, so that sometimes you just got to do what you got to do. It was only a couple acres, but I think I took several years off my lawnmower on that one. But we had to get it knocked down, and the commitment was we weren't going to use chemicals. I also had to drive a mile around in the pastures to get to that site, and then I broke a wheel, so it was not worth it. But we really didn't want to. We wanted to stay away from chemicals on this as much as possible, just to kind of give this a trial. And it just didn't wash. But finally, the spring of the second year after that cover cropping, we were going to go into. That's when we were going to go into some kind of native planting or some kind of grass planting, and the thing was just so heavy in weeds. We just felt we really needed to reduce the pressure, so I just hit it with Roundup. Again, I don't really like doing this, but in this case, we thought it was worth the trial. Drug it then, this little 2.5 acres after it was sprayed, we drug it, and then it was planted to a CRP mix with the rest of our projects at home. Okay, so the whole theme with this whole thing I'm trying to point you to or share with you is what do cover crops do in these scenarios, right? Some of the things that we didn't do while we were applying these cover crops is we stayed away from chemicals, other than my little trial there. And we felt like the cover crop competition, we were giving that a big test with the cover crop competition for a year or two, create such a wonderful mecca of soil and soil biology and soil health that our native plants should just take off and hit the ground running. Now, these are our early results. I should mention that, it's okay to test. This is what we should be doing. We should be testing and expecting failure and testing against failure and trying really hard to understand better. And sometimes, you know, you just need an angel on your shoulder, right, Owen? God, does nobody think this is funny? Look at him. He's got guns. He's got an AC/DC t-shirt on. Anyway, I worked hard on that. All right. Anyway, early stuff. So bottom line is our cover crop trials were nothing to brag about across the board. Not very responsive. It's not that the plants weren't present, but they were just not present at the desirable plants just never have been present at a density that seems like they were going to win this battle at all in most of them. So that's a lot. I know that it's just a picture, but it's kind of a weedy mess, right? And that's in our cover crop trials. This is what it looked like where we didn't use cover crops. And we had a much, much quicker establishment of natives of that just on a CP37 mix, whether it was tilled or untilled prior to. Just another shot of that, the native mix without cover crops as it came in much denser, much fuller, much quicker. I don't really have answers. I just have observations at this point. On the non-cover crop areas, we still had invasive species, no doubt. And I learned later that at this SDSU site where we were, luck of the draw, we put our cover crop trials on top of what I later learned after finally getting some information. They had done Canada thistle planting trials on this exact same ground in the 80s. And I don't know if we just woke up old thistle or what, but they were, you know, I found out that generally speaking, that area of the farm was a big thistle trial area. So take it for what it is. But we landed on some thistle. But again, here's our cover crop trial. Now we're into 2019 in July. And we're just not really seeing, I mean, we're seeing the plants. They're there, but they're just not very dense. And we've got a lot of weed pressure. So then we applied, somebody else, was it Jess, who had the suck meter, but we applied the same suck meter. And we found that basically where we didn't use cover crops, we were pretty low on our suck meter, but where we did use cover crops, we kind of categorized it as pretty high. Things just weren't looking very good. Owen had worked with me then on doing a lot of assessment on the site and came up with these incredible hand signals to take pictures to show what the data would be with the hand signals. And we're both getting pretty old and nobody can remember what the hell these things mean at all. So yeah, there's a hand and there's plants, and that's the only thing that we can get from these pictures. But working with Owen all day is just such a treat that, you know, it was worth it, right? This is what it looked like on the GF&P site where they use cover crops. On the left, again, cover crop mixed with no-till. Now, Kyle thought he had a thistle problem, and he did. This one probably rivaled it and might have even beat it as far as this looked like an alfalfa field before the thistle came up from a distance. It was solid thistle. I mean, to the point where I questioned whether we actually bought thistle in our seed mix. It was so bad. And this had been cropped for, what did we think, like at least 50 years? 50 years of fairly clean cropping. We go with one planting of cover crops and walk away with no chemicals. And this is what comes back. And we can't really put our heads around this one. You could argue that a seed source blew in, but we've already established kind of that unless you have a lot of thistle around, and there's not a lot of thistle that's viable blowing in the wind anyway. Now, that there is thistles around this, to some degree, but the level and density of how this thing came in with thistle is phenomenal. And I don't know what the answer is. In my head, I'm like, there's no way you can farm something for that long, continually turn the soil, continually expose seed to germination conditions, and not eventually wear it out. But at the same time, during that same 50 years, what's to say that other thistle wasn't landing right there again anyway? Constantly, it's the battle. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But fact is this is how it came in. And then they did decide to then split that plot and spray half of it to get some of that competition down. This is really important because we're going to talk about what the end game results look like on these things. On Kyle's, his early results, he had the most success with the area that he drilled the native mix and did not use cover crops. Bottom line, right, Kyle? Everything else, I mean, everything else was kind of a mix, but generally this was the very best results he had in those trials, and he didn't use the cover crops as a surrogate. Another picture from Kyle's. Had a heavy thistle infestation in both the native mix and the mixed cover crop areas where the tillage occurred. Basically, he woke up thistles just like we did, right? I mean, you put some iron in the ground and you're going to probably wake up thistle. Okay, so at the SDSU, we established these transects. We decided we needed to get a little bit of science behind this. What were we observing compared to what was actually truth? So we did a grid system for all of the plants, and then I also wanted to just get a real good handle on Canada thistle in particular, and Owen helped in the field with all this stuff. And getting to spend a day with Owen in the field is a treat, right? And because he's only crabby from about 8:30 till the end of the day. And so he can't write worth a shit, and he's probably should have been a doctor. So I got to deal with him all day in the field, and then I got to interpret his work, and then I got to deal with his attitude. And then I thought about those hand signals, and I started thinking about Johnny Cash songs in my head, and I came up with my own. Anyway, okay, so here's the data. This is generally what we had. Brett Blanken came out and helped with a small side trial on Milestone. I'm going to kind of get to that here in a little bit. But bottom line is, this is not very scientific data. It's more like observational trend data. So I don't want you to take this as gospel truth on everything on cover crops and everything on native mixes. But these trend lines do tell a story. If you look at how I've got the data arranged, where we've got tillage to the left, no-till to the right, no cover cropping to the left, cover cropping to the right, and then the burn trials were pretty much inconsequential. They all kind of worked. But where we did not use cover crops, we had the lowest occurrence of Canada thistle compared to the areas where we used cover crops, where we're higher on the chart, which is the blue lines. Generally speaking, okay, it's these blue lines here. They're all bad. They just get really bad, where we go from 60% to almost 100% of the plots having Canada thistle. Okay, the tillage, honestly, for Canada thistle, seemed like it was better than the no-till, but I don't know. I don't know. You know, again, these are just trend lines. Now, when we talk about the frequency of occurrence of grasses and sorted by our grasses and forbs, the exotics, meaning how many of the plots actually had an exotic grass and forb show up, meaning Kentucky bluegrass, brome, the junk we don't want. And it's separated. So I treated Canada thistle as its own thing, and then all the other weedy forbs I put together because I just really want to know. But again, where you start looking at this, the cover cropping had more weeds. It's just the way the data stacked out. And where we went into wheat stubble, we had even more. That was kind of the top of the list. But the native, now this is sorted by the natives, okay? So now these are the things that we did want, and here the line goes the opposite way. Where we did not use cover crops, we had the highest occurrence of our natives, right? So the data, as I split it both ways, it's telling me the same story. Where we use cover crops, the lowest frequency of our natives. Getting established, okay? And that's the wheat trials on the end. Let me just see where we're at here. Okay, and then when we did the species present, the total, we put 20 some species in. How many of them actually showed up? Again, we had better success where we did not use cover crops than where we did. This is messy stuff. I'm not trying to say that this is this is all of everything. There's so many variables, but I think the trends are pretty darn interesting. Like, we just didn't have any success really with cover crops. I'm going to skip all this because it's just too much. It's just basically, it reiterates the same story. But this is the establishment in wheat stubble. Now, Game Fish and Parks has done some wheat stubble establishment as well and not had too bad of luck. This could be the result of chemical carryover at a research farm. I'll admit that 100%. I don't know why, but our establishment in that wheat was just not very good, and it hasn't really gotten better. But if you take the wheat stubble where we didn't use cover crops, this is an aerial image from our drone. Now, this is bad. Like, this would not make me happy if this was my hard-earned money that went into an establishment project 3 years later, right? But it's a whole lot better than where we use cover crops. Like, nothing's just getting established in that cover crop area. I don't have an explanation. All I have is observations. So this is what it looks like. Dandelion, and that particular one is a dandelion mess. So why are we seeing failure if that's what we're actually seeing? We wrestled with this for a little bit, and then Ben Lardy, who Ben isn't here with us, maybe stumbled upon the most obvious thing that was right under our noses that probably is true, maybe, is that when we went with cover crops, we didn't use any chemicals, we planted the cover crops early, and then we went 2 years in a row. What did we do other than create the most bestest nursery for weeds that we ever could underneath that canopy of cover crops, right? No cattle, no grazing, no pressure, nothing on those early annuals or any early biennial weeds, nothing to suppress them whatsoever. Got nice shade, whatever, I don't know, but no competition really, other than the cover crop itself. And what is a cover crop other than a bunch of exotic plants anyway? So we went into this thinking that the covers were going to be friendly to our native plantings, and I don't know that that's a really solid assumption. Now, looking back over our shoulder, right? Native plants play really well together because they all basically evolved together, but here if you kind of, Ben kind of put a different spin on this. He's like, well, what did you expect? We put 12 species of exotic plants in and expected natives to respond well. I'm like, that's kind of a good point. Maybe we did have our philosophy a little bit wrong on this. At any rate, Brett did a milestone herbicide application to try to knock out some thistle and just see what it would do after we had established natives. And this is an interesting trial that it worked. He got rid of all the thistle, but we also got rid of about 90% of the actual established natives that we planted in that site. Maybe not 90%, but a lot. And we were a little bit dismayed at this because even the Canada wild rye seemed like it took a bit of a hit. And I don't know, we did it at a normal rate that you guys would normally spray at. But definitely cleaned up the Canada thistle. And I think after talking with Brett and Owen about it, it's like, yeah, and we still have some native forbs in there. So as a last resort, if you had to do that for the good of the public or if you had an enforcement or something, your natives kind of hung on, but man, it'd be nice to not have to do that. So that's how dense the Canada thistle was across some of these sites. And we did have some forbs in those unsprayed sites, but again, after the milestone treatment, that fall into the next year, pretty dismal forb response. I'm not sure. I don't have a lot of experience spraying milestone on established forbs, so I don't know if this is odd or not, but I'm going to skip that. Okay, so those were our sites early on, and then over time, these are pictures from 2022. It's really not, we don't have very good bragging rates. The cover crops, now we're 3 years later where we use cover crops, they just don't, it's kind of a weedy mess. Just had poor establishment across the board. I don't know if I'd call it a failed planting, but I surely wouldn't call it a success at this point. So I don't know what I would do with it. If it was private land, I'd probably really consider starting over on this one if I had those kind of results. We'll see where it goes. Okay, so now we're going to go to the ECK project, right? Now I just pretty much left you with the impression that the covers don't work very well. The ECK project had a tremendous amount of weed pressure. We sprayed 2 years in a row, like I said, before we ever put the covers in. We never sprayed since. I showed you some pictures during the intro, very pretty pictures. I had Owen standing out where we had really good establishment, and stuff is coming really well. But we have a real heavy pressure of wormwood sage. I think I'm starting to understand a little bit more about wormwood and Canada thistle and the age of the plant. It's not easy, but they're definitely easier to knock back when they're only 1 or 2 years old than when they get to 3 or 4 years old, I think, and get a good root establishment. We've debated about mowing there, so we did mow the entire site. I mowed the first year twice completely, just to knock back that wormwood component because it is a noxious weed, and it was a cooperative site, and there was reasons to do it. We didn't want to spray. But fast forward to this year, I mowed select portions in June and then left some unmowed, and this is something that Owen and I had really talked about a lot, and like, let's just try it. You know, there's so much wormwood anyway, whatever. It didn't seem like we were getting anywhere with the mowing. But looking back now, in September, these are early September pictures, I definitely, I can't tell you that there's more density, measured density of our natives here than out in here, but you surely can see them better. And there's certainly more observable, and whether they're actually denser or not, I don't know necessarily. That takes some pretty serious measuring to come to that conclusion. However, I know when I look at this, I would prefer the right to the left going into winter cover habitat, whatever. There's pollinators. It seems visually that we made a positive impact, if nothing for nothing else, human impression, with the mowing. And that was the same on the in other areas, mowed versus unmowed. What do you all think? I just want some feedback on this. We don't ever know if mowing is really going to pay off, but I think that these plants probably have a better chance in the long run, but I don't know, not sure. Having had that canopy mowed off. On the south restoration, same types of results. Those that were mowed in early June, generally visually more appealing than those that remained unmowed. That's another south side picture. Now again, these are where we use cover crops. I would argue that our forb establishment on these cover crop trials are much better than at the SDSU sites I just showed you. I don't have the data to necessarily back that up, but you can walk through this site and you can find just about everything that we planted pretty frequently. We were quite impressed in some of the places this spring when we were out there that we finally had a catch. So that's coming. At the project at my place, okay, this is where, okay, yes. So going back to where I showed you with my lawnmower, with the mowing the weeds down after the cover crop with the lawnmower, went back into natives. The Canada Wild Rye established pretty well. Pretty dismal establishment of forbs in that site again. And it kind of keeps on with the same cover crop theme, where we didn't use any cover crops and just went into a normal CRP mix. Much better overall stand, health, and diversity. So how do we work with producers in this? We need to help people understand the value of these forbs, of these plants, of not spraying, of the cover crop stuff I'm done with. I shared with you what we found. I don't really have more depth of the answers, but we have talked also about the value of native plants throughout this thing. And if we're going to actually help producers understand the value of native plants, and we're going to have high diversity sites that we want them to keep in grass after CRP expires, what kind of data can we feed them to say this is why you should think about keeping these plants on the landscape? We know cattle eat them, about 30% of their diet is forbs. What's the value of those forbs? So we launched this multi-partner project here in the last year. So Kaylee Wheeler with SDSU kind of led our field trials this summer, looking at the variety and trying to help educate on rangelands, grasses, forbs, and shrubs. Basically, it was a trial to determine what the relative feed value and overall value of forbs are. So over 1,000 samples, 10 locations across the state. And bottom line is, this is what the early data shows on these forbs. This is a handful of them. This is what a lactating cow needs and a dry gestating cow. As far as crude protein, all of these plants meet the basic requirements or greater than what a cow needs for crude protein. When it comes to the forbs, the same thing. The crude protein of these forbs, as compared to what cattle need, they're above that threshold. So this is pretty positive stuff. Shrubs, same thing. A variety of shrubs, I should say. Total digestible nutrients, again, all of them at or above the requirements. Okay, so that was our multi-partner projects. So I don't know, was anybody surprised on that overall cover crop result? I mean, do you feel like it's, I mean, coming into this, you know, the reason we did this is, and the reason I did those NRCS webinars is like, this is just my observation, but we as a conservation community jumped on the cover crop thing really hard, really fast. And in fact, I thought it was a little odd. USDA started promoting cover crops as pre-planting for CRP, and there's no data to back that up. It just really seemed like it made really good sense. And I you know, as service providers, talking to other people across the country, we went from, hey, you know, this new era of cover crops, like, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Producer, before you put in a native planting, maybe you should cover crop it for a year, get those chemicals and stuff out of the system. I said the same thing. Now I'm starting to question, like, I don't know if it's necessarily the way to go. And it might have nothing to do with the actual cover crops themselves, and have everything to do with how we managed the cover crops. You know what I'm saying? Like leaving them out there for 2 years with no other competition of that weed base. So I'm not trying to say more or less than that. I'm not trying to say it's even a bad idea, but I think we got to get a little bit more diligent in understanding exactly what we're doing, because I'm not too impressed with those results. So.
And if we have questions, we'll hold them till after this session.
Okay.